You can smell it now. Only 2 days away from the Orioles playing a postseason game. And not only that, we now know the Orioles' opponent and we know the game time for Game 1 on Saturday. But what we don't know is which pitchers the Orioles will carry on the postseason roster. Well, I'll try to predict that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, October 5th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are trying to predict the pitchers that the Orioles will place on their 26-man postseason roster for the ALDS against the Texas Rangers that begins on Saturday. On yesterday's episode, I predicted the hitters that the Orioles will take. Make sure to go back and listen to that one. Check it out as well. But we'll talk about pitchers today. Will they carry 12 or 13? Who will the four starters be and in what order? And do guys like Shintaro, Fujinami, and Jack Flaherty have a chance to make the end part of the bullpen? And how does the opponent, now knowing it's the Rangers, affect the entire roster as a whole? But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. But first, it is brought to you by Sleeper. Swing for the fences on Sleeper picks, and you could win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details, currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. So, in this one, we're doing a postseason roster prediction for the ALDS. On yesterday's episode, we talked about the hitters that I thought would be on the roster. And we didn't know at that point who the O's would be playing. The Rangers had taken a 1-0 lead over the Rays in the AL wildcard series where the winner advances to face the Orioles. But we didn't know what would happen next. Well, now we do, because on Wednesday afternoon, the Rangers just destroyed the Rays again, beating Tampa 7-1 in Game 2 to sweep the best-of-3 series. And all of a sudden, the Orioles will not be seeing the Rays. They will be seeing the Rangers. In fact, the two other AL East teams, the Blue Jays and the Rays in the wild card, neither of them won a game. They were both swept out as the Twins swept the Blue Jays. And the two teams combined to score a total of 2 runs in the 4 games they played. Not a good look for the Rays and the Blue Jays. The Orioles, of course, with the bye, are still standing. But it is the Rangers. That's the Orioles' opponent. And that could factor in, I think, honestly, it certainly will factor in to how the Orioles put together this 26-man postseason roster for the ALDS. Now, one thing to remember is you can switch the roster every single round. So the roster you set on Friday or Saturday of this week is not necessarily the playoff roster. It is the ALDS roster. And once the Orioles hopefully advance to the ALCS, they have a chance to make any changes that they would like heading into that next series. And the same would go if they made it to the World Series as well. So let's take a look at what pitchers the Orioles could put on this roster. And let's start with the starters, because I think what starters they're choosing from is a little more straightforward. Now, technically, currently on the active roster, the Orioles have 7 options, right? Bradish, Rodriguez, Means, Kremer, Gibson, Flaherty, and Cole Irvin. All those guys are on the active roster right now. Doesn't mean they're all going to be on the postseason roster, but they're all starting pitchers, and they all give the Orioles options. Now, it feels like at this point, Jack Flaherty, Cole Irvin, not going to start a postseason game, right? Unless something absolutely seriously goes wrong. If those two are going to make the roster, it's going to be as a long reliever, some sort of relief type, and an emergency starter if they need it. Now, you don't need 5 starters in the postseason. Most teams get through a playoffs with 4 starting pitchers because of the off days built in. For example, the ALDS goes game 1 and 2 back-to-back, Saturday, Sunday. Then you have the off day Monday. Then Tuesday, Wednesday, 3 and 4 back-to-back. Then the off day Thursday. And then game 5 would be next Friday, which means, say Kyle Bradish starts game 1 on Saturday, he is easily able to once again start game 5 next Friday. He'd have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday off. He'd actually be on longer rest than usual. Now, if he wanted to start game 4, that would be on short rest, but Friday would be easy. So generally, you only need the 4 starters, which means among the 5 that are in the rotation right now, Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez, John Means, Dean Kremer, and Kyle Gibson, one's got to go. Now, What I will say first is among the starters for guys who are locks on the roster, I think all 5 of those guys are pretty much locks to be on the roster. They could surprise us, right, with the one starter they don't pick, maybe not even goes in the bullpen and just doesn't make the roster. But I would think they pick 4 in the rotation and the 5th guy is in the playoff bullpen to at least be a mop-up guy and maybe be used in some other situations as well. So I would say there are 5 roster locks from this starting rotation. But the bigger question is, who are the starters? Now, again, we know the Orioles are playing the Texas Rangers, a team with a really good offense, one of the best in baseball. They hit a lot of homers. They get on base a lot. It is a pretty deep offense that they've got over there. You got to be able to pitch well against this team. They scored 11 runs in 2 games against a Rays team that pitches the ball very well despite all their injuries. Now, you also are going to be playing at least one game at Globe Life Field in Texas, where the ball flies out of there. So all these things are factoring into your decisions. Now, Brandon Hyde did say on Wednesday during the Orioles live workout that they held, and they invited fans into the stands. I think that was a cool thing they did. He said he wasn't quite ready to name the Game 1 starter. Now, I feel like we're all pretty much in agreement. Kyle Bradish is going to start Game 1. Now, for Game 1, you don't want to as much like play the matchups or play the ballparks or whatever, because your Game 1 guy is most likely the guy you're going to go back to if it gets to a winner-take-all Game 5. And right now, Kyle Bradish is the Orioles' best starting pitcher. I'm starting him in Game 1. He's earned it all year, and then I'm going back to him in Game 5 if it gets to that point. Bradish against Texas this year started twice. The first one was the game he got injured at the beginning of the year in Texas, when an inning and 2/3 scoreless, then got hit on the foot by that line drive and missed a couple of weeks. But he did start against the Rangers in Baltimore on May 28th. He was good as usual. 6 2/3, 1 run, 4 hits, 4 Ks and a walk. Just kind of vintage Kyle Bradish right there against one of the best offenses. And that was back then in May when the Rangers offense was really, really humming. Like they were probably at peak levels back in May, and Bradish just shut him down. I see no issue having him start once and potentially twice against this team. Now for Game 2, which would be Sunday again, we got a game time for Saturday, 1 o'clock. I think Bradish is on the mound for Game 1. Game 2 would be Sunday at Camden Yards. Not sure on a game time yet, but I would actually go a little off the board here. I think I would start John Means in Game 2 of this playoff series, and let me tell you why. This Rangers team hits a lot of homers and hits the ball well. John Means, at this point, 4 starts back from Tommy John in September, but good starts, right? I mean, he finished with a 2.66 ERA in those 4 starts. However, he has always been a fly ball pitcher. Even before the injury, even when he was great, even when he was throwing, the no-hitter in Seattle in 2021, he was at his peak. He's always been a fly ball pitcher. He is not a ground ball pitcher. 56% fly balls in the 4 starts back from Tommy John so far. Also, not only is he a fly ball pitcher, it's a low ground ball rate, and he's not really striking guys out right now. In 23 2/3 innings, he only has 10 strikeouts since he's returned this September. Not really getting the swings and misses that he wants. He's a pitch-to-contact guy. That is dangerous against a Rangers lineup. But he's one of the Orioles' best 4 pitchers, I think, right now, so I would still want to start him in a game. So the reason why I would start him in Game 2 is to have him start at Camden Yards, so he can use the big, deep wall in left field to his advantage. Now, if you look at park factors, Globe Life Field in Texas, which is where Games 3 and 4 would be, and theoretically, if you went by order of your best pitchers, Means would probably pitch Game 3 or 4 on the road. It is the 6th highest park factor when it comes to home runs in baseball, which essentially means it is the 6th best park for home run hitters. It is a very hitter-friendly ballpark. That is taken from data over the last 3 years. Now, Oriole Park ranks 12th there for hitters, but you have to remember that data, the best data we have available on Baseball Savant and StatCast, takes 2021, 22, and 23 into account. It takes 2021 into account when the Orioles were still playing with the old dimensions and it was just a BAM box. If you looked at 2022 and 23, I think you'd go down to the Orioles are more like 20th instead of 12th in that. So much better for fly ball pitchers, especially left-handed fly ball pitchers where righties will see them more, hit the ball against them a little bit more, to pitch at Oriole Park. Because of all that, I'd be scared of the home run ball in Texas, not as much in Baltimore. And we know he's a Bulldog. We know he's ready to start a postseason game. I'd go John Means in Game 2. And then I'd turn it right around in Game 3 and go with Grayson Rodriguez. Now, hopefully that would be a clinching game. O's would be up 2-0, and they'd go to Grayson, kind of in their number 2 ace, essentially, in the second half of the season. He's been great, right? And when you look at his stuff and what he does, it's much different than John Means. It's way less fly balls. It's a 47% ground ball rate. He's much more of a ground ball pitcher, keeps the ball in the ballpark much better, and he misses bats, gets way more swings and misses than Means does, which means against a good lineup in a hitter-friendly ballpark, I'd much rather have Grayson Rodriguez than John Means. Plus, you give Grayson a chance to maybe pitch in a homecoming back in Texas. Of course, that's where he made his major league debut back on April 5th, and he was solid against the Rangers, 5 innings, 2 runs, 4 hits, 5 Ks, and a walk. We know how it went the second time against Texas when he faced them in Baltimore. That was his worst start, and that was the day before they sent him back down to AAA. It was May 26th. I was in the ballpark. It was the debut of the City Connect uniforms, and Rodriguez gave up 9 runs, 8 earned, over 3 1/3, 6 hits, 6 Ks, 3 walks, and he allowed 3 homers, including a grand slam in that game. It got away from him quickly in that one against Texas. But that was the last start before he was sent down. Since he's come back, he's been a completely different pitcher. You get him back home in front of the friends and family, first playoff start, maybe a chance to clinch a series, ground ball pitcher against that good lineup. I'm taking Grayson in a pivotal Game 3, and in a 5-game series, generally, pretty much across the board, Game 3 decides the series almost all the time. I want Grayson Rodriguez right there. And then there's Game 4. And this might be the take that's even more controversial than starting John Means in Game 2. I think, with it being the Texas Rangers, even though Dean Kremer has pitched so well in maybe the Orioles' 2 most important regular season games. He pitched the Sunday game against Tampa, 5 strong innings when they clinched the playoff berth, needed the win to stay ahead of the Rays. And he pitched the AL East clincher against the Red Sox, 5 1/3 scoreless. I get all that. But Dean Kremer, and now it's been much better in August and September. Home run ball hasn't hurt him as much. But in general in 2023, the home run ball has really hurt Dean Kremer. It scares me to have him face a powerful lineup in a hitter's ballpark like Globe Life is. It is what it is. I trust Dean Kremer. And I would go to him out of the bullpen. Remember, he was set to start the 2022 season out of the bullpen before he got injured. I think he can do it. I think the stuff already plays up. It'll play up even more out of the pen. And I think I would still, and it's razor thin margins, me making this decision. Like I went back and forth here, but I think I would start Kyle Gibson in a Game 4. And how you deployed him would be very different depending on if you're up 2-1 or down 2-1. You know, maybe you give him a little more leash if you're up in the series. But Kyle Gibson, a very big ground ball pitcher, about 50% ground balls, which is good for that ballpark and that offense. His home run to fly ball rate is lower than Dean Kremer's is. And Kyle Gibson knows the ballpark, pitched there for the Rangers in 2020 and 2021. And when he pitched there earlier this season against that same lineup on April 4th, I know it was a long time ago. You know, we're looking at this point 6 months ago. 7 innings, a 2-run ball, 6 hits, 5 Ks, and no walks for Kyle Gibson in his one start against the Rangers. I would certainly also trust Dean Kremer in this spot. And again, it's razor-thin margins. But I think Gibson's a slightly better matchup here. And I also think on the flip side, Kremer would fare better in a bullpen role than Kyle Gibson would. And I think if Gibson's in the bullpen, he's more of the long man mop-up guy. Whereas Kremer's in the bullpen, you can use him in some different ways and deploy him in more games to help your team more as a reliever. And then, of course, you would go back to Kyle Bradish in Game 5 if you had to go there. That's how I'd put the rotation. Bradish Game 1, Means Game 2, Grayson Game 3, Gibson Game 4, and Bradish in Game 5. So now we move to the bullpen. What will the Orioles do there? Now, there are a lot of questions about what the rotation will look like, but there's even more questions regarding the bullpen because we just don't know which pitchers are going to make this roster. Who's going to close out games without Felix Bautista? Try to answer all of that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. Now, if you are looking for a place to play daily fantasy sports, Sleeper could be that place for you. It's pretty easy to play as well. You go on the Sleeper app and you essentially pick more or less for stats for your favorite baseball stars. Stud like Acuna and Betts and Gunnar Henderson are all in the playoffs. You basically pick more or less for their homers, their hits, their strikeouts, and you can get a 100 times payout on Sleeper. And if you get your picks right, well, you can win big. And the best part about the Sleeper app is it's super easy to use. Not only can you times your money by 100, but the entries, they're so easy. They can be made in under a minute. You go in, make your picks, and you get out. That is it. Super easy, super simple on Sleeper. So use the promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Check out Sleeper today. So it's going to be Orioles and Rangers. Game 1 will be 1 o'clock on Saturday in the ALDS after the Rangers swept the Rays in the 2-game series this week. We talked about the starters already, who are going to be on this playoff roster. I think the 5 starters are going to be there. I predicted my 4 and which guy goes to the bullpen. So right now, we've got those 5 locks on the roster, and one of them, Dean Kremer, I'm putting in the bullpen. Now, I think while there's 5 locks of starters, I think there are 6 locks in terms of relievers if we're looking at pitchers that could make this roster. In terms of the high leverage guys, you got Yinyer Cano. I think he's going to be the main option as the closer if there's a majority righties coming up in the 9th inning. But I think what we've seen Brandon Hyde do since Felix Bautista's been out for the last month and change, and now we know officially Bautista's getting Tommy John and he will not pitch in the postseason for the Orioles. Cano could pitch most of the 9th innings, but if there's a better matchup earlier and there's lefties coming up, he can go to Cionel Perez, who's also a lock for a late inning guy. Or he can go to Tyler Wells, who closed out back-to-back games last week to clinch the AL East for the O's. Those 3 guys, I think, Wells, Cano, and Perez are going to be your main high-leverage guys for the O's. Now, there's other pitchers who are more middle relievers but could pitch in some high-leverage spots. I'm talking about DL Hall, I'm talking about Danny Coulombe, and I'm talking about Jacob Webb. I think all 3 of those guys are also locks, which put us at 6 locks in the bullpen. They'll probably have a less of a chance to pitch in like the 8th or 9th innings, but they're going to have to get, I think, some key outs for the Orioles. Now, we've seen postseason teams ride 3 or 4 relievers throughout an entire postseason. If I had to guess who those guys would be, it would be Cano, Perez, Wells, and Hall for me that the Orioles would really ride throughout a postseason. And I'd throw Coulombe in there as well. So there's a chance they don't even have to use anyone really beyond those 5. But if you have those 6 with Jacob Webb, who has postseason experience, you also have Dean Kremer in the bullpen as a weapon, you can keep going to different guys. So you got your 6 locks there in the pen, plus Dean Kremer. And you've got the 4 starters, which puts you at 11 pitchers. Now, when I predicted the hitters on Wednesday's episode, make sure to go back and check that one out, I basically gave 2 parameters because at that point didn't know if it was going to be Rays or Rangers. I said if it is the Rays with all their right-handed pitching, I think the Orioles carry 14 hitters and they have space for 12 pitchers. But I said if it is the Rangers, I think the Orioles only carry 13 hitters because I think now Heston Kjerstad does not make the Orioles roster. And I'll tell you why. The Orioles have shown us with how they've used Kjerstad since they called him up that he's basically just a DH or a pinch hitter against right-handed pitching. They haven't let him face lefties. They haven't really let him play the field in meaningful games. They haven't really let him run the bases. So essentially when he started, he's been the DH or he's been a pinch hitter against righties. This Texas team has a lot of left-handers. And trust me, I get these questions all the time. Heston Kjerstad is eligible for the postseason. The rule writes if you have a player who's on the 15-day IL or the 60-day IL or the 10-day IL and has been on the injured list for more time than that and is going to miss the playoffs, you can replace him with a player who was in the organization before September 1st but was not necessarily on the 40-man. All that means Heston Kjerstad would be playoff eligible. They'd get the okay from the commissioner if they wanted to. But I think because of what Texas has in left-handed pitching, Jordan Montgomery started game 1 of the wildcard series, tough lefty, 7 scoreless. He'll most likely start game 2 on Sunday. You've got Martin Perez in there who's kind of pulled it back together. He may be a starter. If he's not, he'll certainly be used out of the bullpen. If he does start, it'll be game 3 or 4. And you've got Andrew Haney in there, same kind of spot. He's either going to be used as a starter or one of their more used relievers, bulk guys at some point, also a really tough lefty. Plus, you look in the Rangers bullpen, and at the back end of the pen, you have Aroldis Chapman probably closing out games, a lefty. You have Will Smith, who struggled down the stretch, but is still a closer with a lot of postseason experience, who's going to get some high leverage spots. And you have Brock Burke, who's kind of a swingman lefty, who they trust a good amount in the bullpen as well. That is 6 main left-handers who are most likely going to be on this Texas ALDS roster, and the O's are going to see pitch. There's not going to be a lot of spots, especially with the rest of the team healthy and Ryan Mountcastle back as well, for Heston Kjerstad to get in the game. And because you don't want to use him anywhere else but a DH or a pinch hitter, I don't know if that's how they want to use that roster spot. So I do think it'll be the 13 hitters, which opens up places for 13 pitchers. So I've named the 11 locks so far. Basically, you have 5 players who are in the Orioles' little mini camp right now for 2 spots. The rest of the pitchers who are in Baltimore right now at Camden Yards at the workouts, who I haven't named as a lock yet, are Jack Flaherty, Shintaro Fujinami, Cole Irvin, Brian Baker, and Mike Baumann. Those are your 5 pitchers vying for the spots right now. I just think because of the struggles down the stretch, we won't see Baumann or Baker get either of those spots. So for me, it's really 3 guys for 2 spots: Fuji, Flaherty, and Irvin. And although Irvin has probably had the most success out of those 3 guys, the O's have a lot of lefties in the bullpen already. Remember, these spots would be in the pen. You already have Cionel Perez, DL Hall, and Danny Coulombe in that bullpen. Would you need a 4th lefty? Maybe. Could be nice. You know, the Rangers have guys like Nathaniel Lowe and Corey Seager in that lineup, among others. But I'd still rather go with Jack Flaherty. I know it's crazy because he hasn't been good. He had 1 good relief outing, 1 bad relief outing with the Orioles once they moved into the bullpen. But he's basically the only pitcher you got with legitimate postseason experience. Like 23 innings in the playoffs with the Cardinals. He's got a career 3.52 postseason ERA. I know a lot of that was in kind of a past life, a pre-injury Jack Flaherty. But it's still Jack Flaherty, and he's still pitched in the postseason before. The O's don't have a lot of that. Only Jacob Webb and Kyle Gibson briefly have also pitched in the postseason. And I also think I'd give that final spot to Shintaro Fujinami. I know it's been rough to watch at times. But when he's on, he can easily be a top 3 Orioles reliever. And I'm not saying you put Fuji on the roster and use him every game, right, in the 7th inning. You put Fuji on the roster as your final pitcher, and if you find a spot to use him, you go to him. And if you don't, it's okay. A lot of times, especially in an ALDS, which can go 3, 4, or 5 games, you have multiple pitchers that just don't get used. It happens all the time in the MLB playoffs. But I just think with the strikeout stuff Fuji has, and without Bautista, the Orioles don't have like an elite strikeout guy except for maybe DL Hall in the bullpen. I just think with the swing and miss and the stuff that Fuji has, we've seen him rein in the command. Maybe, you know, this week off could help him rein in that command. It's just too tantalizing for me. I would put him on that roster as that final pitcher just because the stuff. And if he gives you 1 good outing in a nice spot with that stuff, it's worth it to keep him on the roster, especially if you feel like you're just not going to find many chances to use Heston Kjerstad. And again, it doesn't mean, you know, maybe if they got to the ALCS and they faced a Houston Astros team that is mostly right-handers, they would maybe go back to Kjerstad and take Fuji off the roster. They could totally do it. But for this matchup with Texas, I think it's 13-13 with Flaherty and Fuji in there. So coming up next, we'll finish off the pod. We will kind of break down what my official 26-man roster prediction is, hitters and pitchers for the O's, and then talk a little bit about this upcoming ALDS because we finally do know the opponent and the game time for Saturday. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Bunches. All right, Locked On Orioles fans, you may have heard us talk about the free new app just for sports fans called Bunches. Bunches is a new social network built for sports fans. No politics, no doom and gloom. Well, unless you're a Yankees fan, maybe. It's just sports. They've recently released a new scoreboard feature that lets you check live scores in the app and chat about live games as they happen. You can chat about the Orioles and join the Locked On Bunch by clicking the link in the show notes or the description to get the app, or go to the Apple App Store and download Bunches right now. Bunches is the free app where sports fans can chat with each other. Are you tired of Twitter? Gets a little toxic on there? Check out Bunches. You can talk with other Orioles fans while the playoff games are going on. It's a really cool spot to chat about the game. So download the Bunches app today, and when you do, our friends at Bunches have featured the Locked On MLB Bunch in the Discover tab. You can also click the link in the show notes to join the Locked On MLB Bunch community today. So we're doing the final prediction here of the Orioles ALDS roster, and we know who the opponent will be. It's the Texas Rangers. After they took down the Rays in 2 games, winning 4-0 on Tuesday and 7-1 on Wednesday to sweep the best-of-3 series in 2 games. After the Rangers had limped into the playoffs, just thrown away their chance at winning the division and getting the bye, they just crushed the Rays. And this Rays team, talking all about how, we still won 99 games, still a great team despite the injuries. They just did not show up. Like, they made 4 errors in game 1. They did nothing offensively in either game. Didn't really pitch well at all. The Rangers were all over them. Just a nightmare scenario for the Rays. And them and the Blue Jays both out. 2 in queue for both of them. Wild stuff from the AL East. I mean, we know the Blue Jays were frauds. We watched them 13 times. Orioles beat them 10 times. That's a complete fraud team. Like, that was not surprising. The Rays going out like that, very, very surprising. But it is the Texas Rangers coming to Baltimore for Game 1 Saturday. And after all the hullabaloo about the concert and the game and what would they do, the Orioles did announce a game time for Game 1. It will be a 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern time start on Saturday. The Billy Joel and Stevie Nicks concert, which is being held at M&T Bank Stadium across the street, is at 7 p.m. on Saturday night with the gates opening at 5:30. So it sounds like the plan is you get the game at 1. Hopefully you get it in on time. You get everybody out of there by 5, and then you start bringing in the concert people. It's going to be a crazy operation. It's going to be a lot for the stadium authority and all the workers there. If you are going to either event, whether it is the Orioles Game 1 Saturday or it is the concert, the workers, the stadium workers, the people directing traffic there, treat them the best you possibly can. You should do that all the time, but especially on Saturday, know what they're going through. This is going to be maybe the most stressful day for that Camden Yards area in a long, long time. They're going to see a full 45,000 plus at the Orioles game, and you're going to see potentially over that number for the stadium and the concert with Billy Joel and Stevie Nicks. It is going to be crazy to see how they manage all that parking, getting people in and out, all the people there. There's not a lot of reliable public transportation in Baltimore, as we know, so a lot of people are going to be driving there, which means less and less parking as the day goes on. And oh yeah, there's some rain in the forecast for Saturday afternoon, which means a 1 o'clock scheduled start may not happen at 1 o'clock, which could provide even more chaos if the game gets delayed at all and pushed past 1 o'clock. So it's something I am happy I don't have to deal with the logistics of. But either way, we're getting the baseball game, 1 o'clock, Orioles, Rangers, we know the matchup. Now, this is my full prediction, combining yesterday's episode with the hitters and today's episode with the pitchers. Here are the 26 players I think Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde put on the ALDS roster against the Texas Rangers. For the hitters, Adley Rutschman, James McCann as the catchers, Ryan Mountcastle, Ryan O'Hearn, Jordan Westberg, Adam Frazier, Gunnar Henderson, Ramon Arias, and Jorge Mateo as your infielders, Austin Hayes, Cedric Mullins, Anthony Santander, and Aaron Hicks as your outfielders. For the pitchers in the rotation, got Kyle Bradish going Game 1, John Means in Game 2, Grayson Rodriguez in Game 3, and Kyle Bradish in Game 4. And your relievers are Dean Kremer, Jack Flaherty, Yennier Cano, Cionel Perez, Tyler Wells, Danny Coulombe, DL Hall, Jacob Webb, and Shintaro Fujinami. Those are the 26 players I'm predicting, 13 pitchers, 13 hitters that the Orioles put on the ALDS roster. And again, that's just for the ALDS. They could certainly change it if they do, hopefully, advance to the American League Championship Series. But it's going to be interesting, right? Orioles 3-3 against the Rangers this year. Played them the second series of the year in Texas, took 2 of 3. Then played them in late May in Baltimore. The Rangers won 2 of 3 in that one. So they haven't seen each other for a really long time, since late May. That was that last series. These two teams are still, it's most of the same players, but they feel very different from that point to now, when they've been two of the best teams in the American League for most of the year, and now they are going to face off in the postseason for the first time in 11 years. Of course, their last playoff matchup, the 2012 AL wildcard game, the first ever AL wildcard game. Joe Saunders does his thing. Orioles beat the Rays 5-1 in the first playoff game of my lifetime for the Orioles. Was crazy emotional watching that one, watching that win, seeing the O's advance to the ALDS. Hopefully there can be similar excitement with the Orioles and the Rangers this weekend, but it should be fun. Rangers team that got some solid starting pitching, but it's very injured. Again, Max Scherzer out, Jacob deGrom out, John Gray mostly out. So you're looking at Jordan Montgomery, Nathan Eovaldi, Dane Dunning, Andrew Haney, Martin Perez are their starting pitching options. Bullpen kind of in shambles right now for the Rangers. The Orioles tend to feast on those teams because they love those late inning comebacks. But it's a very, very good offense. You got Corey Seager and Marcus Semien at the top. They've been outstanding. Nathaniel Lowe, a little bit of a down year, but still good. Josh Young, the incredible rookie, is back from his thumb injury. Adolis Garcia's got close to 40 home runs on the year. Robbie Grossman's having a bounce-back season. He's been great. Just a very, very deep lineup for this Rangers team. It is going to be a fun series kicking off on Saturday. And I'm going to preview that series even deeper coming up tomorrow. Full preview episode of Orioles and Rangers ALDS to finish off the week and get you to the weekend. And also, some exciting news got to 5,000 subscribers here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Make sure you still like, comment, and subscribe to Locked On Orioles on YouTube. But thank you all so, so much for subscribing to the podcast, getting me to 5,000. And because of that, I felt inspired to do something a little different on the podcast for the playoffs. Usually we're going Monday through Friday. Now, we're still going to be doing that. But if the Orioles play a weekend postseason game like they do this weekend, Saturday game 1, Sunday game 2 in the ALDS against the Rangers, I will be recording as soon as I possibly can, even though I'll be at both games, as soon as I possibly can after the game and get a recap episode up that day. So we'll have all 5 episodes this week and expect a game 1 recap Saturday night, expect a game 2 recap on Sunday night, and then continued episodes through next week. So again, any weekend day where the Orioles play throughout the postseason, I'll be recording that night. Get it in your feeds as soon as possible for more Orioles content during hopefully what will be a long and successful playoff run. But again, back tomorrow previewing the ALDS between the Orioles and the Rangers. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.